Should we consider serotonin when dealing with depression? If you've seen the latest headlines and if you watched my previous video, it's become obvious that we can't treat depression solely based on serotonin levels or just one theory. Yet, does that mean we shouldn't consider it at all? In this video, I'm going to review why we need a new approach to mental health and all the factors that serve as a foundation for brain health. Then I want to explore some current theories on what can contribute to depression and why serotonin shouldn't be just cast aside as one of them. If you or someone you love is affected by mental health, empower yourself with this information and stick around. You may also want to share it with your mental health care provider or your wellness team. I'm Dr. Sarah, and today we're going to discuss, hold your horses, serotonin and depression may in fact have a link. And this is why naturopathic medicine and functional medicine doctors, you don't have to panic and throw away all of your supplemental support supplements. So stay tuned. Okay, all of the things that I'm going to discuss, if you want to go over the references, if you want to go over the resources, there will be a link in the video description. So if you are a clinician, you can actually access the article with the actual peer-reviewed studies of some of the things I'm going to be saying in this video. First of all, let's discuss why we need a new approach to mental health. So there was this new analysis that was a review of studies. It was called an umbrella review, and it was released. And according to headlines, what it did with its conclusion was officially debunk the whole serotonin hypothesis of depression. Now, this was kind of perceived to be this new radical viewpoint. Oh my gosh, hold your horses. This is huge news. But for many psychologists and psychiatrists, they weren't surprised because they'd been aware for some time of research that demonstrated that depression is not simply one theory with one cause. But the study did ignite a hot debate, and I went over more of this in my previous video, which I will provide a link to. But basically, the good thing is that it casted a light on the fact that our approach to mental health, its interventions, and our understanding of psychiatric disorders in general are deficient. Specifically, our treatment outcomes, our access to them, and the scientific evidence of their validity is actually lacking. Now, to even complicate matters further, our whole method of classifying and diagnosing psychiatric disorders are not defined, and they have not been confirmed. In fact, biologically accurate measurements of specific correlations with psychiatric disorders and a biological marker do not exist. And rather, what we have done in mental health is we've taken clusters of symptoms, grouped them together, and then if people meet certain criteria or have a certain amount of those symptoms, they get a diagnosis. So what is happening is that we are attempting to treat psychological and emotional issues without addressing the health of the actual organ, the brain, which is responsible for producing this cluster of symptoms. So this would be like trying to treat every symptom of a heart problem, whether it be blood viscosity issues or thickness, whether it be high blood pressure, whether it be low blood pressure, just going after all of the different symptoms without actually even looking at or addressing overall heart health. We wouldn't do that, but we are doing that in mental health. So it's no wonder that we have a national mental health crisis. We have to fully address the organ that is causing the symptoms if we truly want sufferers to attain remission. Otherwise, we're just trying to suppress these non-agreed upon symptoms with a pill that may or may not work. So we need this integrative approach. And I know we don't have a reliable, agreed upon physiological marker for depression, but we do have ways to assess and support brain function and its biochemistry. People tend not to be aware of this and the fact that integrative approaches to brain health do exist. So part of my mission and my passion, as you can tell, is to help you, your loved ones, and everybody that's affected by mood or mind imbalances, which is basically everybody because we all know somebody, to understand that mental health can't be fully attained without a personalized approach to brain health. So we need to address all the brain health factors that contribute to any psychiatric disorder, which I will go through in a minute. Just go through a quick review because I went over those in the last video as well, but I think they're important to highlight. So balancing these aspects should be a foundation for anybody struggling with a mood or mental health issue. And we should also, as clinicians, I feel, be considering the literature and looking for newer substantiated associative patterns between the particular mood disorders that we're actually seeing in our clinic with our patients and what it says in the research, so that we have more information and material to go by. So I'm going to discuss this a little bit later in the video. So first, let's look at why we need to address these many factors of mental health, how we form a foundation by looking at brain health. So the brain health is multifactorial, it's complex. All biological processes impact the brain, and the brain helps coordinate all of these physiological functions. Basically, we can't function well without a brain, right? So we can't medicate depression away through manipulation of a single biochemical such as serotonin or any other actual neurotransmitter for that matter. We have to address brain health as a whole. So some of the brain health factors to consider, and these are things I have going on like a checklist in the back of my head now that I've been doing this for years and seeing people with diagnosed mood disorders in my wellness clinic. These are things that are kind of going through my head. Do we need to address things such as inflammation and oxidative stress, because studies link inflammation to depression or mood imbalances? How's their nutrition? How's their assimilation or their ability to digest those nutrients for their brain? Do they have any dietary triggers? Do they have any deficiencies? Because we need nourishment. We need certain compounds, need certain phytonutrients or different substances from plants to feed our brain and help it function optimally. Are there any mitochondrial dysfunctions or imbalances? Those are the cellular powerhouses that fuel the brain. The brain is very energy dense. Are there any hormonal balances? We know that serotonin is impacted by estrogen. We know that GABA is impacted by progesterone. So there's this hormone neurotransmitter interaction. What about their stress and cortisol levels? That impacts brain health and specifically brain function. The microbiome, we know there's this gut-brain link, right? So the microbiome, these gut bugs, communicate through this vagal nerve that goes from our gut to our brain through these metabolites that it produces, and this impacts mood and our nervous system tone. Environmental toxins that we breathe in, that we rub on our body, that we're exposed to, those are associated with cognitive health and brain health. Particularly, there's a link between heavy metals and cognitive issues, as we're seeing with some of the news that we've seen of how lead impacts child cognitive development. Blood sugar levels can impact brain health. We see how mood gets impacted when people are low in their blood sugar. They haven't had enough to eat today, or where they get lethargic if they've eaten maybe too much, right? Stealth infections, or maybe infections that people aren't aware of, but they're causing a continual stress on the body. Childhood adversity, traumas from past actually impact how our brain functions and what we perceive to be safe, and how that impacts our emotional life and our nervous system. Brain trauma, genetic variations, and different neurotransmitter transmitter genes, and how that affects neurotransmitter efficiency can impact mood. High or low activity in certain brain regions for various causes, that impacts how the brain functions, will impact mood. Social support, mindset and beliefs, movement and exercises, sleep, foundational tools to have a healthy functioning brain. Once you get those foundations in place, you can kind of see what is left as far as what else needs to be balanced in the brain. So here's where we see kind of a link to serotonin. So I know with the new study, with my review in the previous video description, it kind of looked like serotonin might be involved, but it wasn't a big player. But actually, serotonin is very much involved in brain function. And I know that the recent review and the new study said that it wasn't linked, but there was these several caveats that I went through already, and I'll go through them quickly again here for you. Well, not quickly, but just not as detailed, so that you have a and understanding. So one of the biggest caveats of the study and its conclusions was the fact that the researchers were measuring a biological marker against symptoms. And that's a big no-no by the National Institute of Mental Health. You can't do that, right? There's no biological marker for depression. And if they're measuring against that, it isn't scientifically equipped to do that or validated. The second thing is that the authors of the study actually did conclude that antidepressants did have some evidence for working for depression. And then the third major caveat is that myself and some of these integrative practitioners, as well as conventional psychiatrists, have seen that when they modulate serotonin, some people do get better. So why is this? So the good news is, we don't have to cast antidepressants totally aside. Maybe we don't fully understand all their mechanisms of actions, and maybe we're not using them correctly with the right people, and they can still have a clinical utility. We just have to personalize it. And I'm going to show you a little bit on how we can do that. And also, this also means for naturopathic and functional medicine doctors, you can save your 5-HTP and your serotonin precursors and your tryptophan and all of the things that help the body make serotonin, because there will be a clinical utility for that as well. Here's why. I want to go through 3 ways that serotonin relates to brain function. And it also will explain why antidepressants work for some people or serotonin works for some people and not for others. So first of all, the brain actually has serotonin receptors. That's probably not a surprise, right? But it's especially rich in the cerebral cortex region. And there's innervation, which regulates the function of this brain region by activating various serotonin receptor subtypes. Now, the study actually only looked at one serotonin receptor transporter gene. They didn't look at all of the different receptors, and there's way more than one. Furthermore, serotonin actually interacts with neurons that modulate GABA, which is another neurotransmitter. It's an inhibitory neurotransmitter. And this is through these interactions that are going on in the brain, which further influences other brain areas. If we look at the work of the Amen clinics, he actually classifies 7 types of depression. Now, he's gotten a lot of slack previously because he's kind of a maverick, and actually he came out and said, why are we the only profession that isn't actually looking at the organ that we're treating? He does imaging of the brain and looks at brain functioning, and he has a lot of research studies on how different ways that the brain is functioning impacts what treatment is optimized for that person. So for people who have a specific type of depression where this cortex is underactive, they do well on serotonin. Now, if it's already highly activated, or if that's just a region that's already optimally functioning, serotonin isn't going to do that much for that person. So here we have the hit and miss theory of when do we use antidepressants or serotonin precursors. That's one way that a specific clinic uses it. I use brain checklists. I also look at different symptoms for the cerebral cortex. There's different ways that we can find this out if you're astute in learning them. The other thing we want to consider is methylation in serotonin. So there's this link between the influence of our epigenome, which is how our brain cells respond to various cues from our environment, and how our brain was kind of trained to respond to those cues since we were young. Now, the Walsh Institute, like the Amen clinics, also works with personalizing brain health treatments, and they classify depression into 5 types. And one type is based on methylation, which is a process that impacts this epigenetic response. You've probably heard of methylation if you followed wellness circles for a while, based on folate, right? Or that MTHFR gene. That is just one way to actually activate, using a specific nutrient to activate different pathways that are related to neurotransmitters and other processes in the body. But what are classified as undermethylated people, they don't have enough of these methyl donors, right, that to turn on and off certain genes. Specifically, they don't have enough methyl factors to activate various receptors in the brain that impact important neurotransmitters such as serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. These types would have high histamine because histamine actually is modulated by methylation. So they would have high methylation because they don't have enough high histamine markers because they don't have enough methylation markers. And that would be indicated in the blood. And they would respond favorably to psychiatric medications and serotonin because their levels are already low. If you have people that are over-methylated, which would have low histamine is one measure, there's other ways that we can figure this out. Antidepressants and serotonin precursors would actually make them worse. It would overdrive their brain. And that's why some people have negative side effects, even some of those more scary side effects like that we've seen on antidepressants. A third way that serotonin is linked to the brain is inflammation. When there's inflammation in the body, the precursor to serotonin, which is tryptophan, is converted into a pro-inflammatory mediator versus going into serotonin or melatonin. See, this rev up for the body is a defensive action to fight against any invaders because the last thing you want in your brain is an infection. And this is why when people are sick and inflamed, they're moody, right? Because they have less serotonin, they're not relaxed, and they're not making those neurotransmitters. They're making this pro-inflammatory mediator. And that's a good thing because you want inflammation to serve this protective function to spark our physiology to actually kill whatever needs to get out of the body, do its job, clean up, and move on. So this explains in studies why we've seen lower serotonin in those taking antidepressants, but yet they might have improved symptoms because these patients might have been inflamed and their serotonin was being eaten up, right? So the antidepressants were actually keeping this low amount of serotonin still available to the brain, but then after some time, the antidepressants stop working because they're still not making enough serotonin. So again, we have to look at this bigger picture of, okay, we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can't say that the serotonin hypothesis has been debunked because, first of all, we know there's way more than just one pathway to depression. And second of all, serotonin is pretty important for brain functioning. Now, we have those three key areas, right? The receptors in the brain, the methylation factors, the inflammation factors. We have this integrative brain health approach, building the foundation of brain health with some of those basic things I talked about. Now, some other theories that are in the literature that your clinician or you probably want to be aware about is the dopamine depression mismatch. So this is a theory of depression that's based on a mismatch between avoidant behavior and relief or pleasure-seeking behavior. So basically people are depressed because they're not getting enough pleasure in their life, right? Their bodies are frozen because they have an imbalance in the brain in areas that are rich in dopamine receptors. They become depleted by stress and other factors. And according to this theory, there's this interaction between serotonin and dopamine levels in the brain. So an imbalance in one also impacts the other. So then you have all of the neurotransmitters imbalanced. Now, interestingly, there was a recent trial reported that a drug that modulated dopamine lowered inflammation. And what this did is it actually, if it lowers inflammation and treated the symptoms of depression, which was found in this small trial of 40 depressed people, what they did is they measured these inflammatory markers, C-reactive protein for the clinicians that are curious. And what they found is that the drug reversed inflammation and changed these brain pathways. And this suggested that depressed patients with high inflammation may respond to dopamine, increases in dopamine, and that functional connectivity in the reward circuitry of the brain is actually something to consider for depression. But it also ignites the serotonin, right? Because if dopamine brings down inflammation, it would also raise serotonin and the two would interact, and that would also impact depression. So everything is linked, which is why we, again, can't say that there's one theory that is so simple. Now, another thing to consider is recently there's been a metabolic theory of depression or mood disorders in general. And this is based on that mental health is a reflection of metabolic imbalances in the whole body. It makes sense, right? Because the brain impacts everything and everything is impacted by the brain. So one thing, as an example, is insulin resistance. And insulin resistance compromises glucose availability, not only to the brain, but to other areas of the body. So at this level, what would happen is that the brain would be deprived of nutrition, insulin, glucose, major fuel. So of course the brain is going to be compromised and mental health will be compromised as well. So one way to reverse this is by treating it at the cellular level, which is at the level of brain energy or the mitochondria. Dr. Chris Palmer actually holds this theory, and he says it integrates biological, psychological, and social factors that help us understand the connection between mental health and physical health. He's a big proponent of a specific type of diet to fuel the brain, but also realizes that we need this personalized approach. So I've kind of talked about three mavericks, right? We have Dr. Amen, Dr. Walsh, and Dr. Chris Palmer. They're all kind of pushing the limit of looking at psychiatry through this broader lens of it's a bigger deal. We need to treat brain health. We need to treat the person. Now, there was some evidence recently, and there's evidence, in the research that he presents in his book, Dr. Palmer, as well as in the books of Dr. Amen and Dr. Walsh. But recent research did find some support that older adults actually with major depression have this higher level of this blood protein, GDF15, which is a marker of aging mitochondria. So this link is one of the largest study to date, providing a link between accelerated mitochondrial aging and depression in older adults. So again, depression is a complex matter. We can't just put it in a little tiny type box and try to biomanipulate one pathway. We get into trouble with that in treating any area of the body, and especially the brain. So we need to address the root cause of the issue. And I know it's not simple and it might seem complicated, but it really is just the basic health, like what we've been doing in integrative medicine for a long time, right? Lifestyle factors, looking at personal factors, seeing somebody's hormones, seeing somebody's lifestyle, their sleep, if they have emotional issues, if there's been trauma, all of these different things we need to look at. And then also kind of buoy that with our latest scientific understandings of the brain and how this is impacted and how we can personalize it even more. So we have to address the health of the organ that's causing the symptoms, which is the brain. We can't continue to try to suppress non-agreed upon symptoms with a pill or talk therapy to balance emotions without addressing biochemistry. We're not going to get full and complete treatment of the brain. Okay, so there's my soapbox. I'm getting off of it. And I hope that this was helpful. I do hope if you found it helpful and you want to expand and broaden other people's viewpoint of mental health, which I think is desperately needed right now. We can't do this alone. All of these mental wellness warriors are really trying to get the word out there, and I'd appreciate for you to share this information with others. I'm also going to be starting a program soon that is going to incorporate mindset, brain, and mind, body, soul, heart. So be on the lookout for that, because I think more people need access to basic brain health measurements. There's also resources available on my website. Go ahead and look at that. There's free resources and information on lifestyle, mind, body medicine, as well as courses you can take as a consumer, as well as a clinician, and especially on essential oils, because essential oils are beautiful in the way that they modulate the mind and our brain's electrophysiology, our brain's biochemistry, as well as our emotional and psychology. So that is one of the reasons I am such a fan of essential oils and why I talk about them a lot, because I see a lot of mood disorders in my particular practice, along with hormonal and digestive. So there you have it. Thank you for taking the time to learn more about an integrative approach to mental health. And I really appreciate all that you're doing to increase your knowledge and to share this with others.